Defined by New York State yet. We have very generally defined it in 4 subcategories. It is those who have been harmed by the war on drugs, distressed farmers, which includes those who are not regularly represented in the farming population, MWBE, and service-disabled veterans. Beyond that, we have not defined social equity, but we are very clear that our work is reparations and then is restorative. So with that guideline, we will be working on a firmer definition, and I think that people can rest assured that we know and understand that communities have been changing over the past 20 years, and that we are going to be sensitive to those concerns. MWBE is a certification in New York State, and we will honor the certification. So if you are in the process of obtaining your certification, please go through with it. It is just a further indicator and a qualifier for social equity status. That is traditionally the challenge that all new businesses face. People do not lend money to folks who are not making money. We all know that. So we need to be very creative in how we align people with those who have funds to lend. At OCM, we are looking for partnerships. We are exploring ideas to figure out ways that we can align our new licensees with people who are capable, able, and willing to make loans to them. We are not guaranteeing that they're going to be zero interest or that they will be forgiven, but we are saying that we are exploring those opportunities. We are very much aware of it. 40% of the excess of the tax revenue will be used to reinvest back into community. If some of those ideas that come before the advisory committee include an opportunity for grant making, I'm sure that they will consider it, and that will be something that will be in years 2 and 3 at best, not in the first. So in the first time around, we really do have to look at and explore what do alternative lending opportunities look like. No, the initial date at the time that they signed the bill was 18 months. Because 18 months is actually a reasonable amount of time to set up an entirely new agency within this state and to create an ecosystem to support this new industry. And we're sticking with 18 months. The unfortunate part is that instead of us starting in March, we didn't get started until October. So we are still, that's when the board was first convened, October 5th. So we started working on October 5th, and we're still holding true to 18 months. It's a reasonable timeline. It's actually somewhat aggressive. But like all people, we want to beat that time, and we want to find ways in which we can come out earlier than what is expected. But we're sticking with 18 months. We're doing the work. We're staffing up. We're setting priorities, and we're really looking at what our regulations should do so that it can support growth, opportunity, and innovation. So we are hoping licensing. And so what I also want to bring to your attention is that what we're really talking about is that we have an ecosystem. We cannot issue licenses and tell people to go open a store if we don't have products available for them to sell. We can't tell people to go and open a store if there's no opportunity for financing. We can't tell them to go open a store and to grow the product if we don't have infrastructure in place to support grows. This is an ecosystem. All of these things have to align, and they must be set up together so that they work in tandem. That's what we're trying to do with the regulations as well as with our planning schedule. So yes, it is a huge lift, and we want to do it. At this point, you have to fill out the application that has yet to be released. But no, but seriously, this is a business like every other business. What I keep encouraging people to do is to realize where you fit in, to create your business plan, and to be ready to rock and roll as soon as those applications become available. So there are no qualifications for a grower other than they have a plan to execute, because I can't tell you that just because you've never grown that you can't be a grower. You have to figure out what you want to grow. It's like saying if you've never owned a coffee shop. I owned a coffee shop, and that's why I'm using it as an example. But if you don't know what you want to sell, you have to have an idea of what you want to do and what makes sense for you and what's going to be profitable for your business. Oh, no. All licensed products will be tested. And so that's one of the reasons that we have to have a regulated market. New York State is the largest cannabis market in the world right now. The largest, larger than California. We're just not regulated. So people don't know where it's grown, how it's grown, what it's cleaned with, what they're actually smoking, what they're ingesting. So it's not about me telling you which strains of the plant, because that's sort of where your question is going. That's not our job. We are going to tell you what your requirements are to produce a safe product. That's it.
That's what I'm getting at. What are the qualifications and what are the regulations? I mean, anyone can, it's like a drug dealer. Everybody has drugs. Some people put fentanyl in it.
So what I'm going to say is we cannot tell you that anything beyond we will be testing, and once we reproduce the regulations, because if I sat here and tried to tell you what all of the regulations are for testing of the plant, they would be wrong. I just can't remember all of that.
And that's another business structure. Labs?
I was going to say, that is something that we already have in the state, and we will be utilizing some of the existing labs, because all of our medical marijuana products are tested. And I can't tell you exactly what all of the testing is, but we have the standards, and those are already written. And so if you want to take a look at what the standard is in testing for either hemp or medical marijuana, those are already available to us, and those can be guides. But anybody can grow that wants to grow, and then they will have to meet the testing standards in order for their products to go to sale. No, and I appreciate that question, because I think everyone is trying to read the tea leaves in this moment. And unfortunately, we're asking you to be a little bit patient while we develop the regulations, because we are trying to do something new in New York. We are trying to center equity. We are trying to make sure that we provide access. We're trying to time ourselves so that the market makes sense when people enter it. We've seen many examples across numerous states where people got licenses and they had to sit on them for months, and in some cases years. We don't want that. We don't want people entering into lease agreements and they don't have a business to operate. We don't want people looking for product and there's none available, and we don't want the market oversaturated. So these are real things. We also don't want people to not know how they're going to move their money. Like, there's some things that are really simple in the business, but that we still need to think about. So we have to think about standard operating procedures. We've got to think about how banking affects us. What's going to happen with your insurance? What happens if you've got a mortgage on the building that you thought you were ready to lease to somebody that's a cannabis business? We're trying to make sure that we can help folks through all of these challenges and figure out solutions. But it's all happening at the same time. So we're building as we walk. And that is somewhat of a challenge, but it is what we're doing in this. So I'm going to say it is, and it's going to be the work of our assembly member and people similarly situated like her, who are doing the work to make sure that they're engaging community. It's two chicks in flower, engaging community so that you are ready when applications are available and your business models are viable. Because that's really what it's about in this moment for us. We're trying to set people up so that they are ready to pounce as soon as they become available with viable business models. We've watched Illinois, and we know that it's sad. We also know it's the Wild Wild West in Oklahoma. We've seen people just hit challenge after challenge. We're deliberately paying attention to those challenges. We're listening and watching how people move in those spaces. We're looking to see how and who are lending money in other states so that we know what to prepare ourselves for and arm people against in some cases. So we're hoping that the preparatory work is what's going to make sure that we don't fall prey to the same problems. But I think these kinds of conversations are what's going to get us ahead so that people know that they can really create a business that's going to be viable. No, it's 50% of all licenses. Let me be really clear, because everybody always has this conversation like black folk just supposed to sell.
Yeah.
This is not a liquor store model.
Yeah.
This is an industry, and I really want people to know and understand that it is 50% of all licenses, all license types. So if you're setting up a co-op, a micro business, if you're cultivating, if you are going to be a distributor, or if you're doing delivery service and consumption, all of it. We need to make sure we have people in all parts of this industry.
But the thought was that, I'm sorry, but the thought is that if you had the micro license, it was targeted to people getting an opportunity because you don't need as much capital to get in, right?
I don't know who told you that you don't need as much because you have to do your own processing.
That's
So
correct,
what I'm saying is, I don't know whose thought
Yeah.
we think that we're capturing, but having sat in the legislature and had an opportunity to be a part of some of these conversations, I can tell you that I did not think when I said that we want to make sure that we have social equity applicants be a part of this, that we were thinking that they're only going to be restricted to one segment of this. Because what I also want to remind us is, we've got to broaden our view of who we think social equity is and who they are and how they operate. They are not all waiting for us to come and lead them to something. They are not people that don't have ideas of their own or don't know how to move money or raise money or operate businesses. They know these things, and they are very capable people, and many of them have access to cash and to capital. So I don't want us to, when we think narrow, we think they're thinking narrow. They're not thinking narrowly, they're thinking broadly. And we need to encourage that, and I just want to say, Stephanie has picked up the mantle, she's running with it. She is in the tradition of everybody else that served in the 56, making sure people know that they have opportunities in what is coming down the pipeline. In 2017, we had our first cannabis conversation here in this building. Since then, a group has been meeting in this neighborhood almost monthly to discuss opportunities, collaborations, and innovation in cannabis. They have access, some of them have access to cash, some of them are the thinkers, some of them are the people who will be the doers. But what I want to say is that they would all qualify as social equity that's in those rooms. And we have to remember that that's what, as varied as we are as people, that's who's in our social equity population. Because many of us who we look at on the street have been harmed in countless ways. and we're gonna let them tell us their story so that they can qualify. We're not gonna say, oh, it's only if you did X or only if you look like Y. So that's what I think we've got to remember as we approach this. The defined roles in the MRTA was our social equity director. That role is going to be filled by Jason Starr. He is onboarding right now, and he will be leading our I believe we call it a division, but it's the Office of Social Equity at the Office of Cannabis Management. And so yes, we are following a similar model, but it is directed for a statewide program because we do know and understand that if we are centering equity in this conversation, that we have to actually put resources behind it. So yes, thank you. Right. The job of the OCM is to implement the law. We are not in a place of changing the law. If we want to see a change to the law, we're going to hand that over to the legislature. But at this moment, we are going to just implement the law, and we are trying to work on a definition of social equity that meets the goals that were intended when we passed the law.
So I need to frame this way. We have, for now, 52, 53 years had laws on the book against discrimination, yet it still persists. And a lot of times it persists in areas because people are tired of actually reporting what's going on. And so it is a fact, and a number of people know that this practice happens, but how many people that actually filed a complaint with the Rights Commission, with the state around any of these issues? We have to be the mirror in this. We have to, if we want to. So first of all, I want to say this. I think that we are ahead of the game because we've put forth the fact that this is a social equity model and who it's intended to serve, right? The four groups that we identified a little earlier. And so since everybody is aware of that, anytime that we see that people are in a space where they're abusing that, we absolutely have to say something. Because we cannot continue to allow people to jump in ahead of the line when we know that this was, for 30 years, there have been black and brown legislators working on this. We cannot let all of that hard work go to waste and be in vain. So please, let's be very clear that your grandmother, whoever, your Aunt Sue cannot have 51% of your company because you want to be on the head of the cannabis line.
One group that has clearly been identified to receive prioritization in the licensing process are those who have been arrested for low-level marijuana offenses.
Wow.
And part of the work of legalization was decriminalization, which began in 2019, wherein we started to suppress and to expunge records. We got about 200,000 from that effort, and then when we passed legalization here in 2021, we have since March included an additional 200,000 more. So in New York State, we have currently expunged, suppressed at least 400,000 people's criminal offenses. But there are more that need to have their situations addressed. However, they are the one group that are identified to receive prioritization during the licensing period. And one of the concerns that we have is what information do we extract during our application process so that we are cognizant of the exposures that we're asking them to put themselves into.
Got it.
So yes, it is something that we're aware of. It is a consideration for us, and we think that the first step for us, though, was expungement. The Office of Cannabis Management is limited to cannabis. That's what we manage, that's what we do. The reinvestment into community sounds like a space where ideas related to what you're talking about might be explored, but I'm gonna say beyond that, I don't think that OCM has a hand to play in that, and I might be, you know, say something.
No, I would just say that there are wonderful models around the country, and that this is really a period where we can do all the research that we need to find something that speaks to what you would like to offer community. I visited a wonderful spot. We were there together in Bushwick just recently, and I was amazed at what they were doing in that space. And so, you know, New Jersey just legalized, so did Connecticut. I was in Atlanta last week for the National Black Caucus of State Legislatures. We had a whole panel discussion about cannabis, and everybody came to that space. So there are so many models across the country that we really should explore during this time, and I'm sure that you're going to find something that speaks to your spirit.
So, depending on how you want to incorporate cannabis into your business, you may just be obtaining a license that is going to enhance an existing business versus creating a subsidiary business. And so that's the challenge of writing the business plan, is to determine how you will be utilizing it. How you utilize it is completely up to you. The only thing we're examining is this a viable business applicant before us when we're distributing licenses?
The people actually pushed this, and they got that initial nudge that made the elected officials act. So what you're talking about is something similar to social justice campaigns that then forward the agenda. So that's going to take the people pushing, the people that have been working on the ground to keep working on the ground, and to keep making sure that there's referendums on these kind of initiatives, that there's actual strategic ad campaigns, that there's petitions around it. Because those things, you know, sometimes when people say that a lot of noise is made, and they wonder if the noise has an effect, and it does. You have to make the noise and grumble, and when the noise is made, you know, activities happen from that.
I think education is extremely important in this space. I don't think it's enough of it. I think there's a lot of talk around business and not necessarily around the science behind cannabis, how it affects the body, how people are using it, people getting the proper education into what's going into their bodies. And I think there's a lot of opportunity that's being left on the table because everyone is only focused on, you know, one aspect of the industry, growing or having the dispensary. You hear people say the same thing. I go to a lot of different conferences and forums, and you hear people say the same thing. I want a dispensary. But there's the ancillary side of cannabis as well. There's a lot of services that are needed in the cannabis space to make sure that we have a healthy market. Cannabis is not new, but any emerging market is going to be challenging in the beginning. So having to figure out, you know, human resources, having to figure out how people are not going to be penalized for using cannabis as a patient when it comes to getting job opportunities. So there's a lot of things that need to be worked out within the industry, but don't just look at it in one specific way. Hemp, you have byproducts of hemp fiber, hempcrete, that's going to help on the real estate side and construction. There's so many different opportunities in cannabis that are being overlooked because people are looking at it one way. So I think educating the community and making sure the community is informed is going to be a very powerful tool in making sure that we have a healthy and equitable market.
I know that there was an opt-out that was offered to counties and real estate owners, and I wanted to know when was, I know the date changed, was it December 31st?
It's December 31st.
Oh, it still is December 31st. Okay, so what comes from that? Once you have a list of opt-outs, what is the next step?
So we've provided municipalities, towns, cities, villages to opt out of retail locations, so they can opt out of having they'll have no retail locations within their municipality, and or consumption spaces. Those are the only two license types that they can opt out of. Legalization is statewide. And if you were growing in that town, you could grow legally. The opt-out is only for those two license types. We're using that to help us determine the siting of licensees. That's what that's for OCM. For OCM, we need to know and understand what it looks like across the state, who's opted out of having those types of facilities, because we have to be mindful to make sure that opportunity exists across the state. Because as you said, we do need to make sure that people have access to product, and some people are self-medicating, some people actually have medicinal cards like you. We just want to make sure that we are able to cover the entire state, so it's informational for us.
Great. And have you heard of real estate owners who feel like they are going to be charged federally?
So I haven't heard that they're going to be charged federally, but I have heard that people are concerned what it might mean to their insurance and to their mortgages.
Right.
And so those are real concerns for people who have obligations with institutions that cannot do business in cannabis at this time. So you need to be mindful of who and where you want to cite a business. And you need to have the conversation with whomever the owner is to make sure they know and understand what your type of business is going to be, if you're touching the plant, so that they know what risks they're taking as well. This is just a conversation of risk. It's not a conversation of, I don't want to be a part of it. People assess risk consistently in business.
Will the state offer a list of approved real estate?
No, because that's not no.
Area?
I'm gonna say, it's not about areas. So a town and a municipality identifies themselves if they do not want to have a retail space and or a consumption. And part of your application is an approval from the locality. So you will know if that's a space that's not open or willing to host your type of business, if that's what you want. So we don't have to go and tell you that, you will know it, because that's one of the things that you would explore in looking for approvals necessary to submit a completed application. What I will say we will do are assist people to come up with solutions for the challenges that they face. If it's us helping to figure out, and we are engaging with different insurers to help figure out who's actually insuring cannabis businesses and who's not afraid to actually deal with them. And what we're finding is that largely they're providing life insurance, but not business insurance. So those are challenges that are across the market. But I just want you to know we're aware of it. We're not blind to it, and we are trying to work with other parties to make sure we can tap into solutions as soon as they become available. So at this point, we are not pushing enforcement. We are pushing education. I'm with you. We have a job to educate our community as well as the legacy market so that they know that there's an opportunity to come into the regulated market. Right. So that's, I'm going to say, one of the primary goals of the work that we're doing over the next probably 1.5 to 2 years. We need to make sure that people know and understand that there is a pathway into this regulated market. So we do not have a penalty system set up. We are talking to them, and we are talking to law enforcement to let them know, yes, this is not, we have not legalized sale. We want to advise people to refrain from it, that gift exchange is not legalized. We have not legalized that. I specifically made a statement during one of our board meetings to make it clear that gifted and suggested donations are not authorized. It is outside the scope of legalization. It is considered illegal at this point. So we advise people not to do it, and we try to help them understand how they can become legal.
There seems to be a sentiment, thank you for that, there seems to be a sentiment though, that operators that are opening businesses and are stepping out of the shadows are considered legacy and are given some sort of preference to actually gain licensure at some point.
So we are not prioritizing people who went and got their, money out the bank and bought some real estate and now have a shop and they've been here for 3 months and we're not talking to them.
The same dude that's opening for 3
Right.
months can say,
We're
I've
not-
been doing this
that's
for the last
not-
20 years, but I'm in the shadows, now I open a storefront, I'm stepping out of the shadows,
That's- so
legacy,
we have to
I'm
look
qualified, I create
at-
jobs, I create education.
So in defining what it is to be social equity and legacy, we are working on those definitions because honestly, those are very technical definitions that have left states open to countless months, even years of litigation. So when we say we haven't defined it yet, it's not to be cutesy, it really is because we don't want to put our foot in our mouths and end up in court.
Fair
we
enough.
are really trying to tackle it,
There's
with
stores opening everywhere.
sensitivity. And I don't want you to think that people who just open up a store are somehow believed to be the better legacy applicant. What we said with those who have been arrested are given prioritization. So just having a store that is not regulated does not give you priority.
Of course.
I want to start the topic on social justice, and I want to hear from Ms. Mills in regards to the biggest challenges that you're seeing in dealing with social justice in this topic specifically.
The biggest challenge that I've seen as far as social justice goes, I see that there's a lot of the community that's misinformed or that they don't know. I'll give an example. They just recently had a Black Cannabis Conference in New Orleans. Louisiana is a hot spot. If you are Black or brown, you are 7 times more likely to be arrested for cannabis. And there were many people that were unaware that the conference was going on, which would be an opportunity for them to be educated. And they did not even know that Louisiana was recently decriminalized. And it is things like that that I think is really harmful when it comes to the social justice aspect, because people aren't aware. There are expungement clinics that go on. A lot of people don't show up because they don't know that it's happening. I was just in New Jersey at a Canademics event in Newark at Rutgers University, and we were able to get 11 people's records expunged, but that's just 11 people, even though that's still a great number, but it would have been more if people were even informed on what was going on in the community. So once again, education and having more community events where we're talking to the people. A lot of the cannabis conferences and events are focused on B2B. Everything is focused on business and profitability. There aren't really as many events that are directly correlated to the community, and you're talking to other cannabis people. It does not really serve the community to continue to talk to people who already know. We need to talk to the people who don't know and inform them, because that way we can have more people on the ground when it comes to lobby days, when it comes to people influencing policy. You don't have to know how to write a bill, but you can contribute to the language that goes into the bill that addresses these specific issues, most specifically criminal justice reform, because to me it doesn't make sense to decriminalize cannabis and still put people in jail. That's counterproductive to what the purpose is.
Are there any programs or organizations you'd like to, speak up or
Absolutely.
let us know, that so people can follow and look into websites, Instagram, just let us know.
Yes, so you have M4MM, which is Minorities for Medical Marijuana. They are an organization which is run by Roz McCarthy. That organization has been very instrumental in helping Black and brown communities. They do multiple expungement clinics. Canademics is another organization. They are based out of New Jersey, but they work with a lot of people from New York because of New Jersey and New York being so close together. And the tri-state area as a collective is, everyone knows it's going to be the biggest market in the entire U.S. So those are just 2 organizations. You also have I think it's the Minority Cannabis Business Association. So there's several that are out there that you can definitely connect with that will give you information as well as knowing where these events are happening.
I just want to add that, we sit here as a collective. Everybody has a role in this new industry, and we have to take advantage of these relationships. Certainly, you all are boots on the ground, 10 toes on the ground, and have access to those who've been most impacted. And we certainly need to work together to ensure that we are bringing that information. Everybody is not going to read a brochure, I know that. So during the summertime, I was standing on corners, doing state of the streets and having conversations with people about, again, not infracting. And if you want to be in business, how can you do that? But I certainly agree with you. I think we need to have more of these, and not necessarily our restoration offices upstairs on the 3rd floor. You come visit me anytime. But we know that there needs to be barbershop conversations. There need to be coffee shops and bars. And I think that I'm one of those legislators that would love to hang out in their district, so I'm willing to have these conversations wherever the people are.
Before you go, I just want to mention that this is a four-part panel, a four-part series. In terms of the summit, one of the main things that we're going to bring to the table is the biggest thing that Ann and I have come in contact with is business writers, the writers of the actual application. We've come in contact with a slew of different businesses that can help you prepare for this application. So we're going to bring a bunch of people that are business writers, that are application writers. We're going to bring them here, government officials that can actually help you before the application comes out, so that you're prepared. We're going to have forums, and so I just don't want you to think that this is it. The conversation continues after today.
Can I add on something too? I want to add on to the expungement part. So, if you've ever been arrested before for anything, you should know what's on your rap sheet. A lot of us might have got arrested years and years ago, and we don't know what is actually on our rap sheets. So what it does is it impacts us from employment, from housing, from other different things. So it's always good to know, because even though automatic expungement took place due to marijuana law, some people still have those convictions on their records. And the reason, and the way they find out is on their record is when they're applying for a job and they're denied due to a background check. So if you've ever been arrested, once again, you should know what's on your rap sheet. Why? Because those things can prevent you from a lot of future opportunities.
Can you can you share how someone?
Yes. So automatic expungement is supposed to happen. So now ultimately you have different organizations, which was mentioned, which was black-led organizations, but you have the major organizations like the ACLUs of the world, the Brooklyn Legal Services of the world, the Bronx Defenders. You have all these different organizations who are working around expungement. Automatic, like I said, it's supposed to be automatic, but for some folk, it's still there. As well as sealing. I worked on this work as far as expungement and sealing. If you've been convicted of a felony, and it's a non-violent felony, it's over 10 years old, and you've never been rearrested again, you can get that case sealed. So it's a lot of different things you need to know once you got a criminal conviction that you need to know, period. So look at your rap sheet, request a copy of your rap sheet. You can get it from where you got sentenced at, if you can remember, the district attorney's office, the court. You can appeal. It typically costs about $25 or so to get a rap sheet, but you should know what's on your rap sheet if you've ever been arrested. Because sometimes, most rap sheets, about 65 to 70%, have identified errors. I'll say that again. Most rap sheets have errors. So that means that you might have got arrested for a DWI, and it might say you got arrested for carrying a controlled substance. So it's good to know what's on your rap sheet.
Stephanie, if I may ask, I believe you mentioned that either you're working on or there's something in the works for expungement. Just to add on to what Roy stated.
So I hosted an expungement event, and we'll continue to, I don't know if we'll be able to do them monthly, but at least bi-monthly we'll be able to host them. We've done them via Zoom and in person. And then Community Services Society is another organization that has a Next Door, it's the Next Door project, and they're able to do expungements as well. So we're so committed to it at the New York State Assembly that our majority leader, Crystal Peoples-Stokes, whose bill it was, actually has held expungement events via Zoom from Buffalo. So this will continue. There's a question in the back.
Yeah, I was wondering if the language and the work around equity is broad enough to include all directly impacted / wrongly incarcerated folks, not this low-level marijuana offenses, given the fact that landing in the web of the criminal justice system often involves something. So to single out that particular, brand of person impacted doesn't do justice to real equity in the space. Is there language around that?
Well, I will say this, and I don't want to sound facetious when I say this, but that would need to be another amendment. The reason why it took 30 years is that people really did not want to have any criminal involvement as a part of this bill, and we fought to ensure that low level was and so if you've had, you know, drug arrest attached with a murder conviction, that's problematic. That did not make itself into the bill. So we have to continue to. Well, one of the things I will say to you is that we've got two great people, one on the Senate side and one on and Latrice Walker, who is on the Assembly side. And they are two lawyers that you really should be in contact with and talk about what are the things that you would like to see. Because they have the power and they sit on the committee to push that agenda, but that's not currently a part of the current MRTA.
Excuse me, I would like to say something, if I have a quick second. I don't think that the reason why that space for those people who are arrested, their rights were taken away from them. They were not able to get jobs when they got out. So to make it seem like they should not get a chance to be in that space, it's a little bit of slap in the face, because when you are locked behind bars and you don't know when you're getting out, and at that time, what they were doing to black people was that they were giving them double the time that they were even supposed to have. Many of them didn't even have lawyers, so they couldn't even fight the system. So the thing is that the fact that they are getting the chance to be the first in, nobody should say anything about it. If you want to expand it and make it more, then you do so. But 30 years was fought getting it to this point because people didn't want to do it. And so if they have fought that fight, who are you to try and jump on and make it seem like you're supposed to have a chance too, when you weren't fighting the fight to begin with, and the fight wasn't with you? So it gets me a little annoyed when I hear stuff like that. I'm going to calm it down and I'm going to scale it back. But I am going to say, when you have been in jail and you are a black or brown person, no one else has nothing to say about what is going on and who gets it and who doesn't. That's all I have to say.
I would like to add to that, not to mention that cannabis was weaponized against black and brown communities.
Well said.
It was not just about arresting people, putting them in jail. We were targeted. It was over-policing. People, Corvain Cooper is an example. This is a called 40 Tons brand. It is another organization that has been providing expungement opportunities and getting those who have been arrested and that are out now, getting them jobs. And he was serving a lifetime sentence and was pardoned right before Trump left office. So you have someone who was doing life in prison over a plant. And that are people who do far worse, and they don't even get half as much time. So when you think about black and brown communities being impacted, understand that it was a tool to oppress our communities, and it continues to be a tool of oppression when you look at an industry that is legal, that is generating billions of dollars in tax revenue, which is the only reason why more states have been pushing to legalize, because due to this pandemic, they have been bleeding money. And they see cannabis as a cash cow for them to be able to generate more tax revenue, but yet decriminalize, continue to put people in jail, put in limitation that says that, well, if you have this amount, then we'll still put you in jail. So if you're going to continue to arrest people and put them in jail and say, well, if you're over the legal limit or whatever the statute is, then they should limit how much you can sell and how much money you can make. But they won't do that. So I feel there needs to be more conversation about how we're going to prevent predatory practices in this industry that's going to continue to oppress black and brown communities.
Well said. But it is the justice advocates and those of us who are there and have had the experience because they live next door, have members of their families who have been impacted by this as well, that is going to keep pushing for it. We know that the way things change is when people tell their story. It's how we got our first black president. It's how we got any particular movement. I don't know why I won't that. And so I can't say this enough. You know, before I was elected, I was heavily in the civic engagement space, and it's a space that I still operate. And the thing that I work on with people is just trying to convince them how strong and how powerful their voices are. And I know that people have this, you know, love and hate relationship with voting, but I absolutely tell you, in my lifetime, it has worked, and it is the best tool that we have right now. But none of that works, and you don't get what you want unless you're pushing every single day. You are getting commitments from your legislatures, and you are getting out there and making sure that you are voting the right folks into office. And then, I always like to say this, voting is an invitation to have a relationship with your elected official. It is not the end. People vote, and then they expect to get everything they want. It's like literally marrying somebody and showing up on your anniversary and saying, that honeymoon was trash, or, I mean, I don't understand it. You have to have constant conversations with folks about what it is that you want. And you cannot leave it up to them to just determine just because you voted for them, because there are other people in their ear every single day, and there are other pressures around. And so we need to stay connected. We need to stay on the same page, advocates, those who are impacted, and legislators.
Good question.
Hi, my name is Takia Young. I'm an engineer by training, but an educator in practice and entrepreneur at heart. And I do a lot of work in the data space. And I do want to speak to you about what you'd love to hear from you all in your respective areas. How are you addressing data and the ethics of data? In this case, we're already dealing with the ethics of data without this. Well, we know that that's some of the reason why some people are concerned, because of tracking, abuse of and manipulation of data, as well as information and how it can be used against specific populations. So I want to know more about how you're either addressing or talking about data, or what's showing up in individual spaces around data and the ethics.
Well, I come from, I have a tech background, so technology, data, I'm a bit of a nerd. So I believe that there are platforms that are actually exist that are using aspects of blockchain to maintain privacy. There's a lot of talk about data and technology, and I know everybody's been hearing about crypto and NFTs and all these different things, but these are all tools in the tech space that can be utilized to help with that issue. I think that the same way that people want to be protected when it comes to what they opt in or opt out to, the same thing should be structured around cannabis, because there are people that don't want to, they don't want it to be known that they are consumers or even medical patients, or they don't want it to, be penalized in the workplace for being someone who consumes cannabis in any way. So I think that there is an opportunity there for someone like yourself or anyone else who is in that space to create those platforms that allow people to feel more comfortable with the information. The main reason why people are afraid is because of the stigma. The stigma is still alive and kicking very well. So the education that is necessary, I think, is going to help destigmatize cannabis and also give people those opportunities to make sure there are data platforms that are not predatory, that are not penalizing people. Anybody who's involved with cannabis that knows, Instagram, they are fine on shadow banning you, or you go to your page and it's there one day and the next day it's not, but then you see people who don't look like us that are able to post tons of pictures and content, a bunch of weed and things like that, and then you have others that don't have that privilege. So there definitely needs to be more platforms, and there needs to be conversation in how we're going to make sure that data isn't used against people.
Well, I would certainly want you to have a conversation with the folks at OCM, because this has to be a serious, there really should be a division that's dedicated to it, given that what's at stake. And when I just think about just what's happening with employment, and what that's going to, how that is going to shift. I sit as the chair on the subcommittee of emerging workforce. And so these are some of the conversations that we have. How is workforce changing? What are the new industries that people are going into? And data is one that we constantly worry about well, we don't worry about it because we know it's there, so there's no need to worry about something that is actually happening. We're constantly figuring out how to keep people safe, how to keep people informed about the risk. I have a newsletter newsletter that's going out this evening is just talking about what's gonna be happening during the holidays. So we're not even talking about now add on this whole new industry and what people can use again against you to weaponize. So I certainly, advise you to reach out to Jermaine and sit down with your industry partners. I mean, I think it's probably really good if we had a roundtable discussion and a series of them, because part of what we end up doing in the legislature, if something goes wrong, that we end up having a hearing and we bring people before us on camera and talk about all the bad things that they've done and ask the questions, and then we've got to go and figure out an enforcement model. But I think this is an opportunity for us to really get ahead of it and amplify what some of the challenges are and kind of start to figure out what we need to put in place to address it. So.
And if I could jump in with the modernization of the cannabis business, and I think what's going to be a positive for users of cannabis is that we're now going from street vendors that might have manipulated the product to now we're becoming something that's regulated, and hopefully we're going to have a purer product. We're going to have less of the overdoses, and this is going to be something important with data. Like, how much overdoses are we having from these kind of instances? Is it producing better, hopefully better results with people becoming addicted or using this as what they consider a gateway drug? Because when I was young, this is where I have to speak from some of my experience. I used to smoke a lot of weed. I thought I couldn't get past smoking weed, and I did feel like it was something I was really hung on until I had a situation in my life where I couldn't smoke. And when I didn't smoke and I saw my friends were when they smoked, and I thought of what was being put on the weed, because we buy weed from a guy on the corner and we didn't know where it was coming from. You didn't know where this weed was coming from. So it's funny to think people are hesitant, and I don't want to bring the COVID thing into it, people are hesitant about a vaccine. But we bought dime bags from who knows where. We'd never see the guy again. So I think this does change it some, because we're going to be buying weed from reputable sellers, not some guy that's going to disappear the next day. And if something does happen to people that are using this product, we know we have somebody to hold accountable for it. So I think that progress and that tech part of it is going to be a very big part of the legalization.
Roy, you want to add anything? Someone have a question? Yes. Sorry.
So one of my questions was, we've kind of been talking about is the stigma, right? And so I kind of want to know, what is New York doing with these institutions that have really placed a stigma on our communities? So what are we doing with NYPD, or even DOD that have kind of forced us into these drug-free zones, and like you mentioned, this is the gateway. You start with weed, you end up on crack, and all these ridiculous things that we now know are not true. How do we break that? Because I think that's where it stems from. You want to get people to show up to these conversations that should be sitting here, but I think it is responsible on those same institutions that made them think this way in the first place. We want to bring dispensaries and retail cannabis to neighborhoods where they're still overly policed, and kids are still being stopped for the most ridiculous things. So it's like, how can we live in these safe spaces wanting to break this stigma, while the institutions that are supposed to be helping us break this stigma are still imposing it on people in our communities?
Good question. Stephanie, would you like to answer as a legislator?
I can start. So I always tell people that you can't legislate behavior. And I want to take us back to the last prohibition that we had when it came to alcohol. So, which lasted for just 13 years, from 1920 to 1933. But the movement to the temperance movement, if you would, started mid-century, 18th century. It took them that long to get the prohibition in place. We are at a moment in time that culturally we are at complete opposition with one another. And so it is not, it's going to take certainly the legislature putting forth policy, regulating those agencies so that we are on one accord and we are messaging. But it is absolutely going to take everybody in this room to yell about it as well. We've had drug-free zones for I don't know how long people have been infracted in those spaces. Right now, we have an intergenerational conversation that needs to happen, and it needs to be a conversation and a dialogue. Because, you know, I've got aunties that smoke weed and others that would be like, oh my goodness, that's the devil's, you know, drug rising in the house, and you're gonna ruin your life. We have to start those conversations. What's gonna be the role of the faith-based community in this conversation, right? What is going to be for NYPD, community, our justice advocates? We're going to have to lead that effort, because they're not automatically going to think about the fact that those are impediments to what we're trying to achieve by the decriminalization.
Can I add on something real quick? So first let me say, it's crazy because we gotta educate ourselves. You mentioned intergenerational, like a lot of our parents, a lot of our grandparents have that big stigma that we will never erase. I don't care how much they legalize it, we're not gonna erase it because that's their belief system. I think ultimately, it's hard to hold media outlets or anything else accountable to what they say, basically living in a world after Trump. So it's kind of hard to deal with that. But I think ultimately the education has to start at home. I think that we first have to educate ourselves to say, okay, yes, we might have started smoking weed for recreational use, but then we realized the medicinal benefits of it. How, wow, I notice when I get nervous, I smoke, now I'm relaxed. I notice while I'm dealing with a lot of pressure, I smoke, this happens. So we're realizing all the medicinal uses of it. But ultimately, the amount of harm that was caused will never, ever be addressed in our community. Amount of people in generations that have been going incarcerated for years, just saying, oh, we legalizing it, and oh, we're gonna give you a gateway to get in, is not really the fix we want, ultimately. I think that ultimately we have to be centered in educating ourselves first. Because ultimately, I always tell people this, because I've been doing criminal justice work for a long time, I believe that you have to first educate yourself and be on the same page from a language narrative, because I believe there's a lot of language that needs to be shifted as well. When you're talking about marijuana, when you're talking about getting high, when you're talking about incarceration, I think a lot of emphasis has to go into the language of what you're talking about, because ultimately the language is going to dictate the narrative that's going to come after that. So we have to address that language.
I just want to add one thing. Medicinally, we were using it before before we were smoking. That plan has been around for a very long time, and we've been using it for a very long time. Okay, I'm just saying, it's been around for a very long time. A lot of our grandmothers and great-grandmothers and such went into and got their roots and their weeds, and they took care of us long before we ever saw a Western doctor.
And now they don't want us to smoke no reefer.
But
again, the education, right?
Marijuana was just one of the smoking. There are a lot of those that can smoke still now. There's over stuff to smoke. Damiana, which is legal on me, but it's legal everywhere else.
Right, and I just wanted to add to that, obviously I'm a caregiver. The education is important, I can't stop saying it enough. The reason why the stigma is so strong is because people have no idea of how beneficial cannabis is. We all have an endocannabinoid system. Everybody talks about just one, CBD, but you have over 100 different cannabinoids. There's tons of clinical research studies that speak towards the benefit of cannabis. I have a 3-year-old daughter. My daughter is a heart transplant patient. I use cannabis for my daughter. She uses CBD and CBG, and developmentally she's done amazing. She has had 0 rejection in 3 years. So for me, I've been able to see how cannabis affects, children who are born with chronic illnesses, adults. I see how cannabis has been used with people who have stage 3 and stage 4 cancer. These are all research studies that is available. Israel leads the entire world in research study for cannabis. And I think educating ourselves on how it affects the body, how the different cannabinoids affect us, and even getting to know your own endocannabinoid system and how the plant affects you specifically. You may not be a smoker. You may use a tincture. You may like edibles. There's so many different ways in utilizing cannabis and not just focusing on THC. People go into dispensaries and they want to be shown, the bud tender to show them what has the highest THC. Some people may need a lower dosage of THC and higher CBD. It just depends on what specifically that individual needs. Microdosing is extremely important. I think there needs to be a standard microdosing model, but that's only going to come from education to get doctors and physicians on board to be able to open that dialogue and have it to where at some point they can prescribe cannabis and they can create a regimen for individuals that need to use it for different reasons. So I think it's really important for these conversations to happen and for community to be involved, because that's the only way you're going to start changing people's minds. Cannabis is used to get people off of hard drugs. So to call it a drug, that's where we have to stop first. It's not a drug, it's a plant, and it has a lot of medicinal benefit. It's more than recreational use, and that's why I don't really necessarily focus on adult use. Any way you use cannabis is beneficial to your body in different ways. So I think we should definitely start that conversation there and recondition people's minds and looking at cannabis as a drug and as a medicinal plant.
Very well said. So I have a question over there?
Yeah, I would like to advocate, because I keep hearing the word education, 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 and I'm looking amongst the panel and I'm not seeing any educators, any teachers. Teachers have the widest span and within any community on any level. We're constantly interacting with parents, institutions, as well as policymakers and holders. And I really feel like that needs to happen. Are there any initiatives to create a cannabis curriculum? Are there any initiatives to do cannabis workshops? Are there any initiatives to even invite doulas into this conversation? There's a wide lens of birth education and family education and parenting education that maybe the traditional school model is failing, because we notice that there's a lot of parent education that needs to happen because parents are constantly working and kids are falling through the gaps. So doulas and birth workers are really picking up a lot of that slack. But we're seeing with the current legislation with doulas, we're just now coming around to the fact that Black maternal health is a huge, dire issue that's affecting our community. We're losing Black mothers in the birthing process. We're losing Black mothers in a lot of the illnesses that come up within pregnancy. And not even just mothers, but to be exclusive of the LGBTQ community, birthing people. People who are getting pregnant, people who want to pursue families, whether you're even a surrogate, there are issues and complications that come with that. And sometimes cannabis is a way to alleviate those illnesses. But if you are in a hospital or sometimes even in a birthing center and you are tested for drugs and you, not the child, you are showing up with THC in your system, you lose your child. You lose if you go into a check-in system, if you're not even birthing, if you go in for a GYN checkup and they even suspect or even have any idea or smell or whatever that you are using cannabis, or someone calls an ACS case on you because you maybe have rheumatoid arthritis. I have a very dear friend of mine who she was called ACS on her, but this woman has debilitating rheumatoid arthritis to the point where she can't even get out of bed and raise her children, and she is a considerably young woman. She's 36 years old. And she lost all 3 of her children. So what do we do in those situations where parents are trying to parent? Where teachers don't get drug tested. That's another big, misnomer and propaganda that is going on around cannabis. Oh, you can't be a teacher and engage in cannabis. Almost every colleague that I've worked in for my 15 years of education, we all consume cannabis. Public school DOE, charter, teaching artists, professors, all throughout the education field and industry. So what are we doing to really include those two populations to make sure that our community at large, because families are getting hit the hardest?
Right, and I come from that. I'm a Black woman. I understand the health disparities in this country. I didn't find out about my daughter's heart condition until I was 7 months pregnant. I never knew that children could be born with heart disease. Yet congenital heart disease is one of the most common birth defects. And the mortality rate is 60% higher than every single pediatric cancer from birth. So that statistic alone let me know there's a lack of education and communication between the medical community and the Black community. So I chose to be an advocate to let Black women know that this does exist. These are questions you can ask, these are things that you can have, ask your doctor and after your child is born to make sure you're not taking a baby home that has a heart condition to where if they stop breathing or their nail tips are blue or you notice their lips are blue or purplish in color, that there's a real problem going on. So those are things that are very much important, and there is cannabis curriculum. There are people who are teachers. There's cannabis nurses. There are nurses who are actually certified to be able to educate in cannabis. There are doctors. If you don't know of the Knox docs, please Google Rachel Knox or the Knox family. They are doctors that actually have a cannabis clinic in Oregon. There are doctors out there that are working with the cannabis community as well as trying to educate and work with current doctors who don't have that education. So there is curriculum out there. There are classes you can take. There are certifications you can take to become an endocannabinoid specialist. And there are courses for doulas to be able to learn how to incorporate that into their education. So it's still being built, and that is something that the National Cannabis Party is actually working with universities. Right now we have 73 universities that have accepted us to be able to start working with the student population and to try and help create curriculum in these universities. And we have quite a few HBCUs as well that are signed on to be able to create that kind of program.
And just to add on to your point, as Corin mentioned, we are building out 3 additional sessions like this, and one of them will cover education. Just like a lot of people in this room, we're learning, we are curious, things are coming to light every day, and that's definitely something that we said that we want to touch on. Educators, doctors, the programs, to bring that information to New York City, because since we are getting into that market in the next year or two, there are other markets that are well more advanced than we are, and advocates like the Knox family, which is things like mother and father, like two daughters, it's a whole family. And there are others, but they are like the pioneers of the education, the medical education component. So we are going to build that out. And shameless plug, but if you guys follow us, Two Chicks and Flowers, we will bring all the information, and all the panels, all their information will be on there. So this is something we're going to build. In the next year, we're going to take a year while we're waiting for the regulations from OCM to bring more information to New York City civilians. Hold on one second. Do we have a question in the back?
I just want to piggyback off of what she made over there. So obviously say a year or two from now, we see what actually want to open up, and it's not like a lot of stores that the rest of them take it. But what about how do we avoid upticks in stopping drivers, as I want to assume that people are under influence now, and what's going to be technology, what's going to be the solution in terms of stopping officers from pulling you over or holding you in the dispensary, right? Using that sort of excuse of the docs to stop people. How do we avoid problems?
That's a great question. And so you all know, let's see if you have my brochure, that currently smoking while driving is illegal, and it is an offense under DUI. But you cannot stop anyone legally because you think you smell smoke or you saw smoke, right? Because it could be cigarette smoke. That is where we are right now, but you and I both know that this is one of these things that we're going to need serious advocacy on, right? And we're going to have to work very closely with OCM to ensure that we are being very clear about the regulations, and certainly what else are we going to need to do as they roll out those regulations as a legislature to figure out, are there additional provisions that we need to put in the law to ensure that NYPD are returning to the, that's a misnomer too, right? So legally, there's no stopping for us, right? But again, this goes back to culture, right? There's a culture in that department that we're all trying to impact, right? We're clear that Black and brown people have borne the brunt of every violent, traumatic incident that you can think about when it comes to a force that was designed on paper to protect all citizens, right? And so this is really one of those spaces that we're going to have to dig deep and put forth what we want to see. What does the behavior look like? What are you legally able to do? And then what is your boss telling you when you all show up to work and you're getting your assignment for the particular a particular day? We've got to be absolutely transparent about what's going on now. So I have 3 precincts that I'm responsible for. I can talk to, I've had conversations with each of those inspectors, and I know what that they are telling their beat cops, their NCOs, their community affairs officers about drug stops in our neighborhood. That I can't control what happens in Albany and other counties, but it literally starts here. And I think that we have been building toward a model of what policing with community looks like, and we need to tell that story. You know, the hardest thing has been through all of this is to deal with the trauma that we're dealing with national, from George Floyd to Tamir Rice is still the one that gives me, just takes me out. And a lot of that gets conflated in what's happening here, but I think that we have done a really good job of having constant conversations with NYPD about what policing looks like in this particular neighborhood. And people have to be brave enough to not only talk about what it is that we want the police to do, but then also what we're willing to do as well. Because people talk community policing, but I've had a difficult time getting people to actually take responsibility of what does that really look like on your block, right? If you can't talk to somebody about their loud music or the block party, how are you going to talk about crime reduction? We have to get to a place where we are resolving conflict so that we're not over abusing 911. I don't know the last time I called 911, because I'm gonna have a conversation with you about what's going on in my block and in my neighborhood. We have to do that while we're pushing back on what they have been doing consistently. So I think we need a list of demands about, well, I won't say demands. We need to have a list about what policing looks like in our neighborhood before and after MRTA. And we've gotta have consensus, because one of the things that we don't have is consensus. Some people are talking about defunding police altogether. Some people are like, I need my NYPD. We have to have that community dialogue and figure out what is it that we need and what do we want to see happen. I hope we get to a place where we are not having to call 911 for everything. If somebody's having a mental health breakdown, then we're calling those peer support people, the hospital personnel, to come and see about that. If we're having conflict, we want to call the Peace Institute and not NYPD. There are all of these different models that we've been looking at, but now it's time really to implement those things, because if we don't, we are going to see the same sort of behavior that we've all lived with during this time. So
just to jump on
that question.
To jump on that is going to really go into maybe revisiting our behavior behind it, because with it being more available and also being legal to purchase and smoke, if the young men in the neighborhood that we're very serious about watching over, if they begin these activities of smoking in the car, now this also breeds another industry, because you know there's industries all around the cannabis use. So now this leads to young men being incarcerated, young men falling victim to car accidents from it. So it's going to have to be very responsible behavior, and also community policing of it, of what is the behavior we're going to be taking part in with this new legalization of cannabis.
Let me add on. Can I add on something real quick? I think that question is kind of hard to answer. The reason why is because we're on the cusp of a new administration coming in. I'll say that again. We're on the cusp of a new administration coming in. So all contingent on how the next mayor decides to do policing is contingent on whether you get pulled over for smoking or not, really, in a way. So I don't even think you really can, it's kind of hard to answer the question, because if there's an overarching heavy hand because of the rise of shootings that's happening all around the city, and they start cracking down on people driving, then everybody falls in that web. We know that as people of color how to work in this country. It's a web that gets created and it swallows up everybody. If you stop and frisk, if you start it again, people want crime to go down, they think stop and frisk is the answer, or broken window policing, whatever you want to call it. What happens is a lot of innocent people are going to get stopped, harassed, arrested, as well as pulled over, arrested. All that stuff is going to happen. So I think it's a hard question to answer with the new administration coming in and not knowing how they're going to go about policing.
Let me jump on that. I remind you that there's two new administrations going in. The mayor is the executive, and he does hire and control the police department, but the city council is responsible for writing the laws and dictating what they can do legally, right? And then I have to stress this. The rest of it is up to us. Because all of those people who sit there, those 51 people there, the 150 that are on the state level, we are all responsible for listening to our community and setting forth policies that's going to keep us all safe. And so it is your voice that is going to continue this happening.
Well said, well said.
I also
Let me say something too. So we have two brothers here sitting right next to each other. We both do work in the community. And I do think that although how the administration looks towards do their form of policing is going to be one aspect, I do think the behavior in cars and smoking is going to be a very big thing. Because going into a car and smoking, as Stephanie said, we're at the beginning of a whole new industry. There was times where people used to drive and drink a beer. That was very common until we understood how terrible of an act that was. So now with this cannabis coming,
Now we got red cups.
Well, hopefully we don't. Hopefully.
Example. I'm just saying example, like.
Because likewise, it's not a good act to do, and this goes on to the community part. So me speaking to young men, my thing is going to be, you don't want to entertain any of these activities while in a vehicle, and it may seem culturally acceptable, and it's really not. It's really not.
I would just counter as an educator with a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you tell a student or you tell a child, you tell a human being with the psychological process of a brain not to do something, what is the alternative behavior?
That's understood, but there are laws for a reason. And now we may not want to say, hey, you can't do this, but understanding we have to say that. Because if we don't, culturally, if we don't, then we have the same thing where we're breeding an industry where we have a bunch of...
But to your point, you're right. Alternatives have to happen, right?
Right.
And so where the consumption spaces are going to be.
So maybe we have a culinary class and we start instituting, okay, culinary cannabis, infused cannabis activities, and then creating more of a demographic that is prepared for the industry. Because as you have a lot of, stay-at-home moms that want to do infused cookies, bakery and pastry and things like that, and then culinary is an activity that is now being seen as a viable resource within high school community. So maybe we take this one activity, but we replace it with something that is productive and still creates a stream of wealth for the children as well as for the industry. That's the point that I'm making. Don't tell them don't do and then not create another activity for them to do.
Agreed.
That's the only thing.
Agreed.
Okay, we're gonna take one final question, then we're gonna have a final, we have two questions, we're gonna ask you to keep it to a minimum, and then we'll have final thoughts. First
Yes.
question.
Okay, first of all, thank you so much for a great group of panelists. I'm a licensed physician for the state of New York and the state of New Jersey. And the first thing I would like to talk is, I'm an advocate for patients, and we really haven't talked much about them. They are the ones that are keeping us here united. You don't imagine the amount of times that I have convinced patients, very ill, very sick patients on the verge of death, to try cannabis. I've been recommending cannabis for the last 4 years. And once I convince them, they cannot get it because it's too expensive. So living on a paycheck or Social Security, having to pay $1,000 a month, it's impossible. So I would like to mention them because I think they are why we are here. And second of all, I would like to suggest to stop using the word marijuana. Marijuana is, we're perpetuating racism by using that word. And me, as a part of the Spanish community, we as Mexicans were criminalized as well using that word. So yeah, patients should be number 1, number 2, and number 3.
Thank you. And then the final question, in the back?
You got it, you got it.
I'm sorry, I'm just curious about what sort of initiatives around. We talk a lot about stigma. We talk about extreme cases of people that are terminally ill.
I agree. I agree. I'm sorry about that. And that is something we touched on. I do think it becoming legalized, we don't want it to be something that we overstep. We go past that and we lose a lot more people to it than we anticipated in the beginning. But I'm sorry. Go ahead, Stephanie.
Well, what I would like to say is that I would like to have the medical personnel here to have this, that conversation. But it is one of the reasons why regulation of the industry is so important. And it's like anything. Anybody that is going to start to consume anything that they're not familiar with and they don't know how it's going to impact them, right? Some people are allergic to avocados, so going back to, this is not necessarily a drug, right? It has medicinal properties, it's a plant, but I can't eat apples unless they're heated up, right? And so that's a natural thing. And so as you introduce any new substance into your body, you should always test it out before you do so. You should have the conversation with your medical professional. The problem, based on what you're describing and what Syriac really is, very concerned, and rightly concerned, because, we've lived through the K2 epidemic and other epidemics that have happened in this community, so it is, top of mind for us. But it is because people aren't thinking about their ingestion, and again, not just with this, with cannabis, but just whatever we do. So we want people to be educated about the foods they eat, the creams they use, what they smoke. We want them to use it judiciously until they figure out how their body reacts to it. And I think that's how we deal with people having these adverse reactions or getting into situations where they can't handle it. We have a society right now, we're binging, right? We binge watch, we binge drink, we just binge, right? And we really need to move away from that and really to start thinking about our bodies as temples and what enters that space and how we enter that space. So I'm looking forward to the conversation with doctors, because this is, it's a #1 issue. I hate pill boxes because older adults take anywhere from 7 to 10 pills a day, and they're not getting any better. And so we have a problem that we need to address, and it's not just around the MRTA.
Thank you. All right, final thoughts, Roy?
I think that first, thank you both. Thank you. Can we give a round of applause? Flower, and thank you for creating this. Thank you for being visionaries and picking this space, this place, because it's central Brooklyn. Everybody know where Restoration Plaza is. I will say this in closing, because I'm a criminal justice advocate. I've worked in this work for 10 years or so, started nonprofits and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, the thing I've consistently done is advocate for people. And I believe that when we start putting people first over profit, people first over everything else, business and everything else, I think that we will then meet people and address the harms that were committed for all these years. But ultimately, educate yourself. It's public information. You can Google all this information that was talked about tonight. You can go on Google and find out what it costs to be a cultivator, what it costs to be a distributor or grower. This is all public information. It is coming. So part of this forum is is a precursor to what's about to come. As a heads up, New York is supposed to be different, and I'm hoping and praying, and I'm holding you to your word, Andrew, that New York will be different than any other state, because we've heard it all so many times before. It's going to be different here, but ultimately we hope that it will be.
Thank you. Syriac, any final thoughts?
Yes, sitting here, I see that a lot of my business is shaped by my mission as a mentor, and how these situations are going to affect some of the young men that I work with. One, in how it can adversely affect them and how it can positively affect them, where they'll be smoking hopefully cleaner weed, but also adversely, what kind of lifestyle and cultural shifts are going to adjust them as they're growing up. So it's something I think we definitely need to stay aware of and pay very close attention to, because with this new industry is going to come new issues.
Ms. Mills?
My final closing thought would be for everyone to be intentional in this space. In the cannabis industry, as we said, so much is focused on profit that we forget about the people, we forget about the patients, we forget about the whole reason why cannabis has been a great unifier in our people that utilize cannabis. And I think that if we meet with intention and make sure that we're building like strong and powerful communities through education, through coming together and helping one another, because, there's always going to be someone that knows more than you do. So getting with those people and bringing all those brilliant minds together is going to be able to help us to create opportunities. Whatever you do not see in this space, you have the power to create. You don't have to wait for legislation. You don't have to wait for your officials to get together. As a community, you get to decide what is best for you. I strongly encourage that, because I get tired of hearing, all of this talk about how they're going to reinvest in communities through the tax revenue, or how they're going to treat social equity. Social equity is not a project, and it's being treated as a project-based instead of really getting to the root why it's necessary and why there even needs to be conversation about diversity and inclusion. So I think that us coming together, bringing our ideas together, and collectively understanding what our communities need and telling the people who are in positions of power, because you put them in, and making them accountable, and making sure there is transparency in how this process works, so that the community has a better understanding of how to help push the legislation and policy that's going to help you. Instead of letting people tell you what's better for your community, be a voice and identify your own voice in yourself to say, this is what we need, because this is how the war on drugs has impacted us, and this is how our neighborhoods are suffering, so that there can be the right programs that are put in place to help you.
Thank you. And last but not least, Assembly Member?
That was a mic drop. Can you say anything else? Other than the fact that I too want to just thank you for this forum. I've held several myself. This by far has been, the most engaged in terms of the questions, and it absolutely has to continue. We need to stay connected. You too need to stay connected. Ask questions. Utilize my office. Send me an email, DM, whatever you need to. If you have a question that you didn't get a chance to ask this evening, she's absolutely right. We are going to write the next chapter together, but that's going to require that we stay in dialogue with one another, that we're honest with one another, that we're talking about our lived experiences, but also sharing our hopes and dreams. Right? Because this is not just about what's happening here and what we've seen before. This industry, this time, is so vast, we don't know where it's going to end up, right? But we've got some real problems that we want to address. Certainly the cost of this, whether or not people will be able to pay for this using their insurance, who will have access, who will be monitoring it, whether it's the data or the police. All of these are factors that we have to take into account, and we need all eyes and ears and hearts and minds united to make it happen. So thank you again for being here, and I look forward to the next one.
Thank you. Okay, on a final note, I would like to thank everyone. We would like to thank everyone. I forgot we're kind of married. We'd like to thank everyone for coming out tonight, everyone that's watching on Zoom and on live. We really feel very overwhelmed, as well as appreciative that we are being welcomed into the space that we have been affected by indirectly as women of color growing up in an urban environment. We would like to thank all of our panelists, Assemblywoman Stephanie Zimmerman, Madam Chairperson of the Cannabis Board, Ms. Mills, National Cannabis Party, Syriac, 500 Making Difference, and Roy Waterman. We also would like to thank all of our sponsors. This event was completely free. We wanted this event to be free. We wanted to include everyone. We didn't want it to be a situation where you had to pay anything. And it was made possible by way of sponsors. All of the sponsors are on the back of the booklet. We ask you to follow, to support, to tell a friend, Some are small businesses, some are major brands, but that's the only way that we can continue to bring you free events if we help them one way or the other. Tell a friend to tell a friend. We would like to give a couple of notable thank yous. First, we would like to thank Marlon Rice for offering the space and collaborating with us to put together the first event. We would like to thank Colin Boston. She has been very instrumental in the media part of this, as well as Beryl Dec. We would like to thank Ty Noel. She has been instrumental in the back. She is our creative director. She is very, very instrumental in this. We would like to thank Talk of the Radio, who is Talk of the Town, Talk of the Town, who is currently streaming this event for us, live streaming.
Come on, you guys.
And we will keep you guys updated via our social media sites. And we thank you so much.